All right, we're back for another deep dive. And this time, it's going to be, well, let's just say, a little different.
Different good, I hope.
Oh, definitely good, but maybe a bit unexpected. We're cracking open an exam prep magazine, specifically one for the Indian Civil Service exam.
Ah, so we're getting a glimpse into what future Indian bureaucrats are studying.
Exactly. It covers all of October 2024. Now, you might be thinking, okay, cool, but what does that have to do with me?
Right, not everyone's planning on taking that exam.
Exactly, but that's the thing, even if you have zero interest in the exam itself, the content is goldy.
It's like a concentrated dose of what's important in India right now.
And honestly, probably globally too. We're talking economics, international relations, technology, the environment.
The sheer volume of information is actually pretty daunting, which is where we come in.
Right, because we're not going to summarize the whole magazine. We're going to do what we do best, extract the good stuff.
Find the themes, the connections, the so what insights. That's what makes a deep dive worthwhile.
Exactly. Okay, so flipping through this thing, I'm immediately struck by how much emphasis there is on citizen participation.
Oh, interesting. You mean like in government?
Yeah.
Huh.
There's this whole campaign called the Jan Yojana Abhiyan. It's all about getting more people involved in planning for their local communities.
You know, that actually ties into something I've been reading about. There's this growing trend globally, not just in India, of governments realizing they need more citizen engagement.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, like for development projects to be truly sustainable, they need to reflect the needs and priorities of the people they're supposed to benefit.
Makes sense. I mean, who knows community better than the people who live there?
Right. And we see this in things like MyGov Sathi 2.0 here in India, but also all sorts of hyper-local initiatives, probably even in your own city.
Huh. I'll have to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, isn't it tricky to balance expert-led planning with all these diverse voices?
Oh, absolutely. This magazine actually brings that tension up. There's no easy answer. It's about finding ways to incorporate citizen input while still making sure decisions are, based on sound data and expertise.
Right. You don't want things that just devolve into, like, mob rule. Speaking of information and transparency, there's a big section on the Right to Information Act.
The RTI Act.
Yeah, and apparently its effectiveness has been facing some challenges lately, which is kind of worrying because access to information is crucial for holding institutions accountable.
Couldn't agree more. And this is where the role of technology gets really interesting, because digitization can both help and hinder transparency.
How so?
Well, think about how you get information about your government these days. Is it mostly online? Social media? Official websites?
Now that you mention it, yeah, probably mostly online.
So that's made information more readily available, but it also makes it harder to discern what's reliable, what's biased, all that.
Oh, totally. It's like anyone can post anything these days.
Exactly. So this whole question of how citizens access information and how that affects their ability to participate, it's super relevant even beyond India.
You know, I never thought about it like that before. But it's true. The way we get information shapes how we engage with the world.
100%. And that's what makes deep dives like this so valuable, because we start connecting these seemingly separate issues, and suddenly it's all a much bigger picture.
Okay, from citizen power, let's zoom out to the global stage. This magazine is packed with international relations stuff. It's like a whirlwind tour of what's happening everywhere.
Well, that reflects reality, doesn't it? The world is incredibly interconnected these days. What happens in one corner affects us all.
Yeah, that's true. One thing that jumped out at me was the India-China situation. There's apparently been an agreement on disengagement at the LAC.
The line of actual control.
Yep. And it's being described as a three-step process.
Yeah.
Disengagement, de-escalation, and then eventually de-induction.
It's a positive development for sure, but it's important to see it within the larger context of India-China relations. Things are still very much complicated.
How so?
Well, there are still ongoing concerns, like the situation in Arunachal Pradesh, and the trade deficit between the two countries is a major point of contention.
So this disengagement is one step, but not the end of the story.
Exactly. It's a step in the right direction, but the relationship remains complex.
Speaking of complex relationships, there's also a section on the India-Maldives dynamic.
Yeah.
And it seems to be a lot more positive.
Oh, yeah. What's going on there?
Well, apparently there was a recent state visit, and it resulted in a bunch of promising agreements. Economic cooperation, development projects, things like that.
The Maldives is a fascinating case, geopolitically speaking. Its location in the Indian Ocean makes it strategically significant.
Right. I can see how that would be important.
And for India, it's a bit of a balancing act, because China's influence in the region is also growing.
Yeah. So it's like Everyone wants to be friends with the Maldives.
Pretty much. It's about maintaining those relationships while navigating the complexities of regional power dynamics.
Okay, so we've got China, the Maldives,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a whole section on the India-Canada situation. Things seem to have gone downhill pretty fast.
Yeah, tensions have been escalating over the issue of Khalistani extremists, and India has raised concerns about Canada's stance on its sovereignty.
It's a reminder that even seemingly strong relationships can be strained by these kinds of disagreements.
Absolutely. It highlights the constant challenge for countries to balance their national interests with their international partnerships.
Okay, deep breath. Because on top of all that, this magazine also touches on India's role in ASEAN, the expansion of BRICS, and even something called the Anaconda strategy. It's a lot.
It is. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, think of it as an invitation. What piques your curiosity? What do you want to learn more about?
You're right. It's all about finding those threads that pull you in. And speaking of things that pull me in, the economy.
Ah, yes. Everyone's favorite topic.
Oh, I have to admit, I sometimes find economics a bit dry, but this magazine actually made it kind of fun.
Well, they do have a knack for making complex stuff engaging.
For example, they talk about this new World Bank index called the Be Ready Index. It replaced the old ease of doing business ranking.
Oh, I've heard about that. It's supposed to be more comprehensive assessment of a country's business environment.
Right. And even though India wasn't actually included in this year's index, it's still super relevant for them
How so?
because it shows what areas they need to focus on if they want to attract investment and boost economic growth. It's not just about making it easy to start a business, it's about the whole ecosystem.
So things like regulations, legal framework, institutions.
Exactly. It's about creating a level playing field where businesses can actually thrive. Not just survive, but like really flourish.
I see what you mean. It's about long-term sustainability, not just short-term gains.
Yep. Now, for something uniquely Indian, there's this whole discussion about dwarf firms and what they call the multi-plant phenomenon.
Dwarf firms, what's that?
So basically, these are businesses that have been around for a while, but they just never seem to grow beyond a certain size. They stay small.
Interesting. And the multi-plant phenomenon.
That's about big companies that, instead of having one big, efficient factory, they operate multiple smaller plants.
I wonder what the implications of that are for efficiency, for productivity.
Right. It raises all sorts of questions about India's manufacturing sector and its ability to compete globally, and how this all ties back to that Be Ready index we were talking about.
It's like a puzzle, all these pieces fitting together.
Totally. Okay, now for something that's definitely not fun to talk about, but super important. This magazine expresses concern about the growing gap between the rich and the poor in India.
Yeah, that's a persistent challenge in many countries, unfortunately.
And to really understand it, they dig into different ways of measuring poverty. The headcount ratio, the poverty gap, the multidimensional poverty index.
Each one gives you a slightly different perspective, right?
Exactly. It's not just about how many people are poor, it's about the depth of that poverty and the broader factors that contribute to it.
It's a good reminder that statistics only tell part of the story. We need to remember the human element behind those numbers.
Absolutely. Okay, are you ready for something a little more upbeat?
Hit me with it.
Science and technology. This section is buzzing with innovation.
Always exciting stuff. What caught your eye?
Well, first of all, the Nobel Prizes. The Chemistry Prize went to some amazing work on predicting protein structures using AI.
Oh, yeah. That was hugey. It's like science fiction becoming reality.
Right. To be honest, I need a bit of a refresher on proteins themselves. Why is understanding their structure so important?
Well, think of proteins as the tiny machines that make life possible. They do everything in our bodies, from building tissues to fighting off infections.
Okay, so they're kind of a big deal.
Massive. And knowing their structure is like having the instruction manual for how they work, which opens up all sorts of possibilities.
So this Nobel Prize-winning research is basically giving scientists a superpower.
Exactly. It's already accelerating research in countless areas, from medicine to biotechnology.
Incredible. Okay, and then there's this thing called the Virat Gen program. India's launching this ambitious initiative to create AI systems that can work in multiple Indian languages.
That's fascinating and so important for a country as linguistically diverse as India.
Right. It's about making technology accessible and inclusive.
Yeah.
So everyone can benefit no matter what language they speak.
Exactly. It's also a clear signal that India wants to be a leader in AI, but on their own terms, addressing their specific needs and priorities.
It's inspiring, honestly.
Seriously.
Okay, before my brain explodes from all the science.
I hear you. There's a lot packed into this magazine.
There is. But let's squeeze in a few more highlights. They also talk about the space docking experiment, the Unified Genomic Chip.
The Unified Genomic Chip, what's that about?
It's designed to create detailed genetic profiles of Indian cattle breeds.
Wow, what's the purpose of that?
Apparently, it's to help identify desirable traits, like milk production or disease resistance, so they can improve breeding programs and boost agricultural productivity.
Clever. It's amazing how science is being applied to solve all sorts of real-world challenges.
Okay, I think we need a break. But before we do, one last theme that kept popping up: water.
Water.
Yeah, it's everywhere in this magazine,
Hmm.
which makes sense considering India's water challenges.
Absolutely. Water scarcity is a huge issue.
And this magazine highlights a bunch of initiatives aimed at addressing it, like this thing called the Jal Hai Amrit program under AMREAD 2.0. It's all about promoting water reuse and recycling in urban areas.
That's fantastic. And honestly, it's relevant well beyond India
How so?
because water scarcity is a growing problem worldwide. So the solutions India is exploring could be valuable in other countries facing similar challenges.
It's like what they're learning can benefit everyone.
Precisely. And it ties back to what we were saying earlier about how deep dives like this help us connect the dots between seemingly disparate issues.
Yeah, it's like this magazine is a crash course in the interconnectedness of, well, everything.
It is. And speaking of interconnectedness, let's not forget about the Living Planet report. It paints a pretty sobering picture of declining wildlife populations globally.
Yeah, that was a bit of a downer, but important to acknowledge.
Definitely. It highlights how habitat loss and climate change are driving biodiversity loss, and that has repercussions for all of us.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have, from citizen participation to international relations to the economy, and we even squeezed in some science and the environment.
My brain is officially full, but in a good way.
That's the goal. And there's still more to come. We've only just scratched the surface.
So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into this fascinating exam prep magazine. We'll be back soon.
Looking forward to it. It's amazing how this magazine manages to connect these big global issues to what's happening within India. It's a reminder that we're not just, passive observers. We're all active participants in shaping the future.
So true. And speaking of shaping the future, I was particularly struck by the section on India's achievements in science and technology. There's just so much happening, and it's clearly aimed at, actually improving people's lives, not just making headlines.
Absolutely. For instance, they highlight this year's Nobel Prize in Chemistry.
Yeah.
And the awards recognize some incredible work both in computational protein design and in predicting protein structures.
I remember reading about that. It seemed like a really big deal. But to be honest, the details were a bit over my head. All this talk about proteins, why is it so important?
Well, you got to think of proteins as the building blocks of life. They're involved in practically every process in our bodies, from digesting food to fighting off infections.
Okay, so pretty crucial stuff.
Totally. And understanding their structure is like having a blueprint for how they work.
I see. So one of the Nobel Prizes went to a scientist named David Baker, right? He's doing some pretty futuristic stuff, creating entirely new proteins.
That's right. Baker's work is essentially about designing proteins from scratch, using computers to figure out how amino acid sequences will fold into these complex 3D structures. It's incredibly complex, but the potential is huge.
It's like scientists are becoming architects of life itself. What kind of applications does this have?
Well, imagine being able to create proteins with specific properties tailored to perform certain tasks. This could revolutionize medicine, allowing us to develop new drugs and therapies that are more targeted and effective.
That's mind-blowing. And then there's the other Nobel Prize winners, Demis Hassabis and John Jumper. They developed AlphaFold.
Ah, yes, AlphaFold. This is a total game changer. It's an AI system that can predict the 3D structure of proteins with remarkable accuracy. Before AlphaFold, this was a painstakingly slow and expensive process.
So this AI can essentially do, in hours or days, what used to take scientists years.
Exactly. And it's already having a huge impact on research. Scientists are using AlphaFold to study everything from cancer to Alzheimer's to COVID-19.
Wow, it makes me wonder what other scientific breakthroughs are just around the corner. Speaking of AI, the magazine also discusses the launch of India's VaratGen program, which aims to create AI systems that work in multiple Indian languages.
This is such an important initiative, especially for a country as linguistically diverse as India. It's about making sure everyone has access to the benefits of AI, regardless of what language they speak.
It's a powerful example of how India is not just adopting technology, but adapting it to their specific needs and context.
Exactly. It also has huge implications for things like public services and